Welcome today. I am Julie Pruitt, like Liz said, NCEDA board member. I'm also the development manager at Marlboro Development Team, and I am the MC for today's land use webinar. And we're happy to have you with us. Before starting the program, we would like to acknowledge NCEDA's annual sponsors at the Cardinal, Longleaf Pine, Dogwood, and Patron levels. You'll see their logos on the screen now. These companies and organizations support every component of NCEDA's expansive mission and our growing body of programs. We thank all of these sponsors, along with our media and annual partners, for their generous support. Webinars that benefit our membership, like this one, result directly from their support. Today's webinar, Finding Balance, the Impacts of Land Use, will feature an engaging discussion with our very own Chris Platay, Executive Director of the Monroe Union County Economic Development Commission and NCEDA immediate past president. Chris actually presented on this topic in 2022 at the annual conference, and we have received many requests for repeat performance, and today is that day. As residential development and other political interests encroach on land, practitioners must understand the various uses that generate the highest revenues for their communities. Today, we will delve into the value of various land uses, the cost to serve them, and strategies to balance the overlapping districts. We hope you will walk away with strategies to benefit your local economy, reduce the need for tax rate increases, and enhance services for your residents. As Liz said, Chris will take questions at the end of the presentation, but feel free at any time to enter your questions in the Q&A box. And now I'll turn it over to Chris, but I will be back to help with Q&A at the end of the program.
Thanks, Julie. Welcome, everybody. Looking forward to presenting to you today on something that we spent a lot of time with in Union County, trying to analyze the impacts. It's so important, particularly in a fast-growing county that's the residential encroaches on us so much. So I want to kind of go through some of that today. Let me share my screen. Okay, did that share correct? Okay. Again, trying to find balance, I think, is the key for so many things in what we do. And so let's see. There we go. Things we'll discuss today, as Julie said, kind of talk about the primary land uses, the values of each, and how they can affect your community's economy. It's really the cost to serve of what these different zonings basically require, and then the EDC's role to advocate for the proper application of that zoning so that we do create more of a balance. Again, if you kind of look at the purpose of economic development from our perspective is to target certain industry clusters that will hopefully generate jobs for our folks, as well as bring in the type of industries and the clusters that we are hoping to develop in our counties. That in turn generates the tax base and the tax revenue to the county to then cover the cost of these services, hopefully keeping the tax rates down for our citizens and keeping the quality of life good. So again, in essence, we're building that local economy. And we need help to do that. We need the planning departments, city councils, county commissions, and planning commissions all to kind of work with us on this. There's probably more when you look, if you want to get granular, but for the most part, we like to keep it into three categories, which is residential, commercial, industrial, and agriculture and farming. And then commercial industrial to us is not just what we specifically touch, the economic development piece of recruiting industries, but also anything retail commercial. So looking at grocery stores, doctors' offices, dentists, whatever services may be housed in sort of office type structures. And the one big thing I want to make sure that as we talk about this, we're not against housing. That is something that is it is so important for us. I think all these uses are really symbiotic and require each other to make a true well-balanced community in the economy. So looking at the residential, that investment is really key to providing the bread and butter for us, which is the workforce. If you look at North Carolina, since 2000, according to the state, we're averaging about 100,000 to 120,000 people per year coming into the state. Most of that's in migration from places to that. That residential development is a catalyst for our retail development, which again is part of the commercial base, and it does support our education network. If you look at it though, residential does create demands. It demands on services and the ongoing cost and maintenance of those. Not to bash on one particular group, but if you look at the fire departments, a ladder truck is not a cheap thing. It's about 1.4 plus million now for a fire truck. You look at a park, the easiest and cheapest day that you do a park is the day you build it and open it up, but then it's constantly requiring maintenance. So these are things that are required by residential, particularly the residential that's coming to the state now, as they have a lot of services where they're coming from. Residential development is, again, is the highest cost to serve compared to any other land use. So if you think about schools, think about, things such as libraries, any public safety, those things are consumed mostly by the residential portion of our local economy. If you look at commercial and industrial, pound for pound, acre for acre, nothing is more valuable to your community than the commercial industrial. And that's not disputable. So if you look at it based on all the studies that are out there, people much smarter than me that were sort of leaning on their studies demonstrate this. And so a lot of times your planning departments or others kind of like, well, I don't know what to do with a certain use. Let's just put it in commercial or put it in the industrial use. That's the worst thing you could do and something you should fight as hard as you can against. You need to have special districts for certain places, but you don't put an asphalt plant in the middle of your industrial area. Because again, industrial is not a dumping ground. It is the highest valuable pieces of property in your community. They not only are the most valuable, but they provide most of the jobs. So if you're looking at careers, in the industries and all the jobs that are created just within the industries that we recruit, but it's also the ancillary companies too, the supply chains, someone's got to go get their haircut. Someone's got to go to the grocery store that work in the area. So those jobs really compound. If it wasn't for the industrial and commercial base, that's not going to be there. People are going to have to commute out of the county to find those occupations. Industry shoulders virtually all the tax burden. When you look at it, they pay for pretty much all the services for the residents and supplement their tax bill. We'll get to some of the numbers later, but when you look at it, it's a significant increase in the property tax rate if you did not have the bases that we have in most of our communities. Excuse me. And one of the biggest things I don't think people truly realize is, who do you think gives the most to the United Way? Who gives most to the battered women's shelter or goes to, something for the Council of Aging, whoever that may be, giving to the arts? That is the industries. It's those corporate fundraisers that they have and things like that that really support the philanthropic component of our community. So while those are residents, but they're residents that they're only giving more because of the campaigns and things that are run by our local industry. So that's a piece people don't typically remember. And that, again, takes the burden off the taxpayer and off of DSS and other entities. And then the agriculture, those parcels are productive pieces of land that generate sustainable jobs as part of the culture of many counties. And so that's something that we definitely want to protect. And again, it's a productive piece. So you're actually making more money on these agricultural parcels than you do residential. It provides also necessary food. I think we saw that during COVID, that it was critical that you get food closer to the market because the distribution chains start to break down. So looking at, the farm to table restaurants in the larger cities, they require that ag just in the adjacent counties. Also, if you're residential primarily, but other parcels, we see typically a 10% increase in the value of residential land by being near the open space of farming. So something to consider too, that value is not just on what tax it generates and the salaries it generates off of that land, but also what it does to the surrounding properties. So I'm a big sailing guy. Love it. And so to me, it's a great example of what balance means. If you have the wind coming into the sails, you need that pressure on the keel. And when those two marry up just right, the boat is just flying. So that's what we want to see our economies do. So if you look at it from a textbook ratio, just a random look at counties across the United States, if you had a 60% residential makeup of your tax base and a 40% non-residential, which is industrial, commercial, agriculture, really anything that doesn't send a kid to school, that area at 40% is a good healthy mix. You're going to generate enough from the non-residential to pay for all the demands that residential have. And again, then residential helps support that commercial base. So it's a cycle and symbiotic. County planning, community planning is critical to ensure the balance is developed. And so, looking at your UDOs, looking at other planning documents to make sure that there is a reserve of some land so that you can try to get to that balance. The way we look at it is, again, almost like a business. These zones generate revenue or generate cost. And so which ones generate the highest revenue to you should be the priority within the land use development. And so focus on those high revenue tax base zones. If you do not have balance, a little illustrative crash of a boat, and you don't want to be that guy falling off, is you're going to see taxes will have to increase if you do not have enough commercial base to help support the tax. There's only one option to do it, and that's because you're not going to generate enough tax for the demand that's by the residential, so your taxes are going to have to increase. If you don't do that, you have to cut services. Either way, all the residents, their quality of life is going to begin to suffer for what they have an expectation of. And then the people that have the means to leave will leave. They will move on to other communities that aren't out of whack in that balance. And so we saw this prior to the disaster that San Francisco is now, but earlier when San Francisco was just thriving, children could not move back because the housing costs, the taxation, everything else had just driven up the cost of living there, that children couldn't come home. And that could be the same situation here, that if your taxes go up, your services drop, it's not as attractive to children that may go off to college or community college and say, you know what, I got a better opportunity somewhere else. And so you lose some of you get the brain drain from the community as well. So again, as I said, they're interdependent on each other. Housing is definitely required for the industrial base to have the employees. The farming is there to make sure that the housing can eat. There's other services provided by the industrial so that the housing has a great quality of life. So the misconception is many community leaders feel that, residential growth will lower my property tax because it increases the tax base. Well, that is not true by every measure. If you look at, this is Professor Dorfman from the University of Georgia. He's one of the experts in the US on this, as well as our own Dr. Rinkow at NC State University. But while residential development brings in tax revenue, it also brings demand for local services. Cost of providing these services exceed that revenue. And by every case studied, that it cost more to have housing than what the housing generates, even those that are extremely high in value. Here's an example that Dorfman did in 2016. For Duplin County. He did several counties as well as Dr. Renkow at NC State. And so I brought some of these forward. There haven't been a lot of other recent studies, so I apologize about the dated data, but it's still very illustrative to what we're talking about today. So at the time in 2016, the residential base in Duplin County was 55% residential. The industrial commercial was 25%, and ag was around 19%. So looking at that, the cost to serve that residential base was 90.5% of all the ad valorem revenue coming into the county. So when they looked at that, basically the property tax coverage ratio, which is basically what do I get for every dollar I generate in property tax, what do I spend to serve that tax base? So for every dollar they generated from residential, it cost them $1.14 to serve. So they lost 14 cents on every dollar generated from the residential tax base. And this is consistent across the board, every county, every state in the United States. The industrial and commercial is 25% of the tax revenue, only consumed just under 5%. So basically, for every dollar generated, it cost them 30 cents to serve that zoning area. So basically, they made 70 cents. They kept 70 cents in profit for every dollar of tax generated. Same thing with agriculture. It was only 19% of the revenue, but it didn't cost very much. It was only, again, under 5%. And so for every dollar, it cost them about 41 cents to serve that district, making themselves, 59 cents per every dollar. Let's look at Lee County. Again, this is Dorfman in 2017. 60% of the tax base was from residential. 75% of all of the cost out of their ad valorem tax revenue went to serve that area, and it cost them 32 cents for every dollar they generated. So, a little bit worse situation there. In the commercial side, it cost them 47 cents for every dollar they generated from industrial. Ag cost them 31 cents. And so again, you can see on the side for both the Duplin and Lee example, the North Carolina average and the US average. And just to kind of show you some other examples throughout the state, this is coming from Professor Dorfman and also Professor Renkow. Is Chatham lost 15 cents. Wake lost 54 cents for every dollar. Orange, 31 cents. Alamance, 47 cents. Davie, 14. Henderson, you can see it go down the line. The North Carolina average, again, is 23 cents lost for every dollar. That's fine. It's expected. And so the way to handle that is to make sure that you provide balance by bringing in commercial tax base. So we're not saying that this is bad. We're just showing this is what it costs when you add schools, public safety, parks and rec, libraries. I mean, just all the things that are just consumed by the residential, that it costs more to serve that community. And again, this is fine as long as you balance it out. So let me show you another one. This is a pretty bad example. Back in 2015 or 17, we produced this report. It was for the 2015 time period. Union County, we were 83% residential. Today, and we'll kind of go through some of this, but unfortunately, because of COVID and everything else and the mass migration to North Carolina and the housing inflation and reassessment of those houses, we're at 90% residential today. So we've put in more industrial development than we have in my history in the last 2.5 years, and we're still losing because of the reassessment values continue to drive the homes up. If you look at the industrial tax base at the time, it was 13%, agribusiness was 4%. But again, for us, all the residential development consumed 93% of all the ad valorem tax that came in. So they generated 83% of it, but took 93%. The industrial generated 13%, took 6%. Ag generated 4% and took 1%. So what does that mean? Basically, the county lost about $15 million on their residential development. Again, that's expected. It's just something to show you that the housing does not cover itself. Excuse me. The industrial, that small amount, that 13% of the tax base, profited to the county $28.7 million. So that basically covered the losses and then some that the residential put on us. So basically, at the time, the average home was 265,000 in Union County. To make this work and keep the tax rate where it was, basically every home was subsidized $500 in their tax bill. So what they would normally pay, add 500 if we did not have the industrial tax base. That would basically mean at the time we were around 60, 61 cents tax rate, it would have taken it to 94. So over 30 cent increase in property tax if you did not have that industrial tax base. Now, looking at the average value, let's say someone says, well, we can solve that by just bringing in more expensive homes. Well, the break-even number was at that time 327,000. So looking at that, obviously you've got the lower end homes that is going to push that average, right? So if you were trying to get to 327, you're thinking, well, that wouldn't be that hard, right? It's not that big a differential. To do that, the next 5,000 homes had to average $1.1 million each to move that needle to that number. So again, it's just not possible to make residential pay for itself. And again, kind of going back and repeat the same thing. That's fine. That's expected. But it's a problem if you do not provide the commercial tax base to help offset those losses. So in Union County at the time, we needed 1 acre of industrial land to offset 2 acres of residential. So municipalities, again, aren't exempt from this. Again, they have a lot of high cost as well. Typically, your biggest cost in a municipality is going to be your public safety versus at the county level is going to be schools. So this was done for one of our towns, and they were a little bit out of whack. They're in the 90% range, 90+% range now for residential value. But at the time, the average home was $295,000. The average home built at the time was 400, but the amount generated from an acre of land, it was over $1 million of value sitting on the commercial land. So if you look at it from a business perspective, the cost to serve, the industrial zone netted a profit of 383% more than the residential zoning. So again, if your community is business minded, looking at it this way, it makes no sense for you not to make sure that you protect and invest in your commercial tax base. It basically took where the county was 1 acre to 2 acres to sort of offset the difference. Basically, at R20 zoning, it took 1 acre of industrial to offset every 2.7 acres of residential land just to get to a break-even point. So what do we do? The ways to balance, land use policies, again, should be focused on cost to serve. That should be an integral part of the UDO process. Economic developers should be brought into that process and not leave it to just planners alone. No offense, but I don't think planners actually do truly sometimes have the long-term strategic understanding of the economy in mind. And so that they need our input to make sure that that is accounted for. Densifying your residential development. I think if you start looking at the cost to serve, the more sprawl that you have, so avoid that sprawl or the leapfrog development where a town may do a satellite annexation. That now costs a lot because you got to run police and fire or whoever out to these, it's got to run longer, or you got to put in more precincts or fire stations or whatever to serve that sprawl. You're just adding more and more cost to that. So trying to densify your residential into tighter zoning or to go vertical, townhomes, apartments, that can ease some of the burden of what residential does. And again, if you don't do this, you just try to tax your way out of it. And it really becomes a pyramid scheme. We have certain communities that their whole model is just keep bringing in residential because they don't have that commercial tax base. And once the residential stops, then they got to pay the piper. So there's this pyramid scheme that they've created and they're building, their economy starts to collapse and they're going to have to tax their way out of it. And you're going to see people doubling their tax rate just to cover these costs, particularly if they've consumed all of their available land within the municipality or the county for residential. So it's really takes some long-term thought, place things out there where you think the commercial industrial can be and thrive. So again, that requires the economic developers to be engaged in that process. So again, why do we want to achieve that? It's again, commercial and industrial. Repeat this to your people as much as you can. It is the highest value land use available in any government. Do not spoil it by making it a dumping ground. Find out what your offset may be when you start looking, just like I said, for Union County, it was 1 acre of industrial to 2 acres of residential. Find out what that offset may be by doing some of the math with it and looking at the zoning and where you are. Work towards setting aside that industrial land because again, we've seen residential moves a lot faster than we do. And they can just gobble that land. They can pay more for it because they can carve it up into small pieces and make the same or make more revenue off of that. But again, they don't have to deal with the costs associated with it. Then the county or the town has to bear that cost. So making sure that those areas are set aside via zoning or actually acquisition or some other options, something to acquire the land and protect it. An example in Union County is we waited 40 years for the Monroe Expressway, the toll road to go north of us. A couple of towns have already put packed residential right on the zoning, or right on the nodes of the expressway, wasting that land, putting where it should be. Residential can be there, it just needs to be set further back. Your oceanfront property there should have been more of a commercial use. And that's unfortunate because again, we waited 40 years for that and they squandered it really quickly because they just decided to go with a wave of residential. So that is sort of an overview of what it is. That was a little quick, it was about 30 minutes. So just wanted to start engaging the questions.
Thank you, Chris. We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A box. And let's see, let me read the first one to you. If your community tax base shifts from more residential to commercial industrial, does that lead to lower tax rates?
Let's say that one more time.
If your commercial tax base shifts from more residential to commercial industrial, does that lead to lower tax rates?
It can, but there's a problem. So again, you want to be in the balance area. So for example, the city of Monroe is high industrial and the residential rates have not been until recently have sort of lagged behind. That's a bad situation too. So you do not want to be out of balance, more industrial than residential. And so you got to be careful with that because again, we didn't, it wasn't a problem from a workforce standpoint for Union County, but it does create a quality of life within the city limits. There was an issue there where most of the executives live somewhere else. Now that has changed, particularly since COVID, but at the time it was, so you don't want to go the opposite way either. So you want to just keep that balance as close as you can. Like for Union County, the 60/40 of the textbook, Union County, we're probably a 78% residential is where we should be. Is probably a good, healthy number for us. Just because the housing cost is so high that it offsets a little bit more of its cost. And so we lose about 6 cents per dollar generated, anywhere from 6 to 10 cents. To give a concept there, but there've been parts of our county where we inverted was not a good thing.
Right. And just a reminder, if you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. We've got another question, Chris. Does land zoned for industrial commercial cost more to developers than land zoned residential?
I don't think so. I think, but you can carve up residential land to R20, R10 and get a lot per portion of an acre in the residential side. With the industrial, you're buying larger tracts. So even if you're selling 10 acres or 20 acres at a time, per acre, that's going to be less. And so it's cheaper to develop industrial land. You've got to be able to find owners of the land that are willing to sell you at a price that you can, basically put in the infrastructure and then still sell it at a market rate. But they're getting sort of stuff in their ear from the residential people that, oh, I can give you 3 times that rate. Um, so it does cost, there's an issue there trying to get people to understand. And really your zoning is just kind of refuse the residential development. Um, again, not everywhere, but where you're trying to target that industrial, protect it from residential encroachment.
Right, right. Okay. Um, let's see. I don't see any more questions. Anybody have any other questions for Chris? Oh, let's see. Okay, here's a couple more. Good. For the studies you showed on Duplin and other counties, how would a county or local community go about getting a new analysis?
Yeah, it's basically through the ag department at NC State. So I'm not sure if Professor Rinkow still works there or if he is retired out, but there would be someone in his place that looks at that. Same thing as Dorfman is basically sliding toward retirement. When I talked to him several years ago, and at UGA. So, but UGA, they did some studies in Georgia, but they included certain counties in North Carolina and South Carolina as a part of that study. So, I would really go to NC State through the ag side, and they have a group just looking at the land use. And so that would be your cheapest and easiest source, I think, to do that.
You could also do some of that analysis yourself. I mean, I know that when we were in Catawba County, we did a lot of that analysis ourselves just by looking at the tax values and
Right.
being able to look at, okay, what does the tax values look like? And our people within the tax office were able to run reports for us whenever we asked for them. So that's also an alternative.
Yeah,
if you try to do it yourself.
we did a lot of it ourselves, so I do it for all the municipalities as well as for the county, for Union County, but then we kind of run it to make sure sort of a test through Wingate University, their School of Business there, just to make sure that the concepts are right and we got the numbers kind of close. Again, it's Clemson math for me, so I got to make sure it's right.
Okay, here's another one for you. How does the cost of services survey account for infrastructure demands for industry, which in some sectors is fairly heavy? These services are large and harder to stand up in the short term.
Yeah, basically the analysis is only looking at an ad valorem. So most of the utilities are going to be enterprise funds. So they're not counted in that sense because they're standalone. Their rates should cover their costs. So as long as they're not being subsidized by the general fund, it doesn't work in this process because again, the enterprise funds are covering their own cost. How you apply those rates, the residents may supplement some of the industrial in certain cases. But that's a city council or, or water authority or sewer authorities kind of decision to do. But where there's a kind of the old, like either, the value added agribusiness where you're really, a Tyson facility or a dye house or something like that may still be around. Those are going to use a ton of utilities. And again, that's up to the enterprise fund or the authority to figure out how they disperse the rates. It has nothing to do with the actual cost to serve from the tax standpoint.
Okay, we have one more. Have you seen success with local council embracing this messaging regarding land use and communicating that to their residential community that typically does not care for industrial in their backyard?
We have to educate every 2 years. So every time there's an election, new people potentially come on board. We have to constantly educate and bring it up and remind people. And then you have planning boards too. So it's difficult because again, people see residential the way I think a lot of people do. That, oh, it's new tax base. Look at it's $400,000 homes. How could this be a bad thing? It's not a bad thing. It's just it's not going to cover its costs. So every time you add, you better have set aside something to offset that. Again, you've got to bring commercial to your area anyway. It doesn't have to be industrial. It can be grocery stores and things like that that add to the quality of life that your community has. So you better set aside some of that too. You know, every place needs a Chick-fil-A, right? So you better
Every
put
place, yes. Okay, that's all the questions I see. Any more? You have any more questions? See,
so if,
there's another one. Okay, great. I love this. What suggestions do you have for economic developers when working with planners where zones are beginning to blur, industrial, commercial, residential? How to help the planners understand the cost balance of policies governing stormwater, parking ratios, etc.?
at least from the planning side, you know, and I pick on planners, so excuse me if there's a planner out there. You know, they go to a conference and they come back with all these funny little names for, you know, town center and something else, and it's got all the kind of uses in it. That to me is very difficult to fight. Because again, they'll pick a zone and say, oh, well, we'll control how much residential goes in there, but they don't. You know, they can if it's either political pressure or other pressures to allow this residential to go in there. So you really should try to go back to a hard zone for some of this stuff, you know, and make it a general industrial, light industrial, heavy industrial, whatever, to delineate and protect your areas as well as commercial. And don't let it be, I mean, mixed use can be there, but I would prefer to do more of a conditional district. Put a little bit few hurdles in there to slow them down. So that at least you're developing what you want there and you can get some tax base on the site with the residential. What was the other half of the question about the stormwater?
Yes, how to help planners understand the cost balance of policies governing stormwater, parking ratios, etc.
Um, we've been very lucky with parking ratios. We don't have them for the most part. We've gotten rid of that in the industrial side and just basically let it happen with the company for what they need. Because again, you know, the old formulas don't really work with new manufacturing. You know, they've automated so much that you don't need X number of spaces for, you know, 100,000 square feet. Some may need 5, some may need 100, you know, and it's really company specific. Yeah, the mosquito pits, I hate the stormwater. It does consume a lot of land. And so trying to work with them and come up with creative, you know, sort of phased structures where you can still get the percentages that you want, but working with grass swells and other plants that will help eat the bugs and stay away from wet ponds and try dry ponds and things like that to help companies not you know, because again, you get a wet pond, that's expensive to maintain and keep. Where the dry ponds, you just drive the lawnmower through it and you keep going. So you try to eliminate, open their minds to all the different strategies for stormwater without having one preferred fix for it, which is a mosquito pit.
Okay, we have another question. What about multifamily versus single family? Does multifamily help with the balance?
Yes, because you're densifying. So you're getting more value per square feet by going per acre because you're going vertical with it. And your service, such as a police call or a fire call, doesn't have to extend out. So when you get to single family, you're sprawling at that point. So not that you want apartments everywhere, but definitely try to strategically place that where it's closer to the service. And so if it's closer to a precinct for a police or closer to a firehouse, something like that, where they're not having to, you know, spend a lot of time running out, you know, 3-4 miles versus they could run a mile or something like that.
Right, right. And Josh Hollingsy, who has had several of these questions, he said, great advice and perspective. NCEDA should spend some time with APA.
Yes, I agree.
Yes, yes.
Again, there's a balance, right? Everything's a balance. So it can't be just our way. Even though I think we're, you know, the smartest people on the planet, but yeah, I think we need to balance everything out and consider all the factors that are there to make sure our communities are, you know, the best they can be.
Okay, any other questions? We've had a
Well,
good
guys,
run.
I was going to say, Julie, if anyone needs, please feel free to call me. I love talking about this stuff. We've done a lot of work on it. So we welcome anyone's phone call. I think we're going to try to work with some other communities in Mecklenburg. The old friend of mine is the deputy manager in Cornelius, and so we're going to work with them and some other folks too. So just, we love kind of talking about it and sharing our thoughts.
I have one more. Any rules of thumb in metro counties versus suburb versus rural?
No, I think you got to really look at your do an analysis on your community and see where that sits. Because again, for some people, the agribusiness could be pretty significant where it's not as critical in like a Mecklenburg or a Wake County. And so you just got to look at those balances there. But I think, in most urban, you're going to be vertical, right? And that's going to help them to some degree, but they don't, they don't have a lot of space to put in sort of traditional manufacturing. So theirs is going to be, not that we've had a lot of office projects, come through recently, but, they're going to be more office focused. They're going to be white coat manufacturing, and sort of engineering, those kind of things, instead of traditional manufacturing that you would see sort of in the next ring and then the rural rings outside of that. So it's just, each community is going to be unique, and you just need to do some analysis with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just like you do whenever you're deciding what to recruit. Every community.
Absolutely. Yeah. Where are you competitive?
Exactly. So I have one that says lessons learned during the recent growth in North Carolina.
Yeah, put brakes on residential because it came so fast. And I don't think anyone was prepared for it. It stripped. I know Union County's got some issues with sewer because of the residential growth. We are not alone. So I know there's a lot of folks, that particularly in the Charlotte region, that they are residential developers have actually hired consultants to go find whatever available sewers there within the Charlotte region. And, they're going to move quicker than we can. So we need to protect it.
Absolutely.
So that was, yeah, I mean, again, it's great from we had a lot of jobs created in that time frame too. So if we did not have that residential growth, we couldn't have supplied the jobs and workers to those companies. So again, we're not anti-housing by any means. You just got to take it in a digestible rate.
Right. Balance. All about balance.
Yeah. It's the word for
which, we've got another question. Does industrial and retail create the same level of balance, or is pure industrial better for balance?
So where industrial, to me, like distribution is retail. That's kind of the same. But when you look at industrial, about 40% of the investment in industrial, or used to be, was the building. The rest of the investment was going to be machinery and equipment. So machinery and equipment does depreciate, but it's replaced on a regular basis too. So you get a lot more value internally to the building with the M&E than you do the brick and mortar, where distribution and retail, you're getting the brick and mortar value. So there's something to think about there. So you want to blend it. For us, we're definitely a manufacturing center. So that's what we want, because we want the equipment. And the more automated they get, the more value is going to be in there. Same thing. I mean, distribution is becoming more automated, so there will be more equipment and M&E investment in that side. But manufacturing definitely is going to be your bigger value per acre, per square foot, whatever term you want to use.
Absolutely. Any other questions? That's the last one I see so far. Okay, no more coming in. Okay, well, thanks again, Chris, for your time today and your expertise. NCEDA strives to keep economic developers' toolboxes full, and we know the economic future of the state and country are vitally important to our efforts on the ground. We hope this presentation gave insights into land use and the importance of understanding various uses for the benefit of your communities. So we want to thank our sponsors again, and I want to mention that we have a very busy spring coming up. So we have 3 webinars on March 28th, focusing on supplier scouting made in North Carolina, April 16th for a Legislative 101 session, and April 30th with an EDP&C spotlight on international business growth. And then we also invite you to join us in person. We have 2 luncheons scheduled. In April, we have one scheduled in Asheville, and in May, we have one scheduled in High Point. Of course, do not forget the legislative breakfast on May 8th in Raleigh. And of course, our 2024 annual conference, June 25th through the 27th in Wilmington. So look for more information in our e-newsletter and on our website. And with that, we want to thank you again for joining us and have a great day.
Thank you.